Hello everyone, apologies for the two-part video. You may notice that I've changed rooms. Well, you probably don't actually because it's a whiteboard and there's a whiteboard behind me before. But anyway, I just got thrown out of my last room. So this is part two. Please make sure you watch part one first. I will call them part one and part two. And before I got thrown out of my room, we'd left off on exchange rates. Let us carry on. All right then. Third thing that influences our patterns of trade, our imports and exports, is obviously what goes on in the world. Because if British domestic consumption, i.e. consumption of British goods by British people, is all about what Britain does, when we're talking about trade and exports and imports, we need to really be thinking about what goes on in the rest of the world as well. So obviously the world changes, global demand changes, imports and exports, and the patterns of what we buy and sell from different countries will change. And the general assumption is, and we will look more into this in more depth next year, a strong economy imports goods and services in order to meet its needs. Okay, so this might lead to an increase in domestic consumption as these goods are used inside the country to generate more goods and services. What do we mean by that? My obsession with English missiles is growing by the day, it would seem. All I've ever talked to you about is Britain making weapons. But yeah, so let's imagine that you've got a company like BAE, British Aerospace, and they're making missiles to put on aeroplanes to go and shoot at things, okay? What we're not going to suggest for a second is that every single part in that missile was made in Britain. The metal might come from France. The metal might come from Poland. Now, we know, or I know, that Poland is a kind of net exporter. They're very good in metals and steel and stuff like that. So we might buy the metals from Poland. We might buy some of the chips and the technologies in there and all the radar bits from France. And obviously then what you'd also say is that in order to make those chips and the radar and the this and the that, France might have had to have gone to another country, I don't know who, to get hold of the metals and the kind of component parts to go in there, all right? Because we're a sophisticated economy, that's what we're doing. And obviously by buying in all this stuff, by buying in all these chips, that means that Britain gets to make more missiles, simple as that. But the last point, if an economy increases its productive capacity by using the factors of production, this allows it to increase supply to the rest of the world. And what we're talking about there is the more developing states, maybe the more basic economies. Okay, for example, Bangladesh as a nation is still developing. And how do we know that? Because 90% of its $3 billion worth of exports comes from textiles and cotton and bits like that. Okay, why do they do that? Because they've got the land, they've got the climate, and they've got the people that want to deal in fabrics and textiles, okay? And what they'll do is they'll be supplying the rest of the world. So what you could argue is that by exporting, that is letting Bangladesh as an economy grow and develop, all right? Whereas if it didn't export, well, I don't know what it would do. And what does a country do if it's got 90% of $3 billion worth of exports as cotton and just used within the country? They need to trade that stuff to get the country money to buy more kind of technological stuff. Okay. Let's have a little think about the Americans in terms of global imports, all right? Buying from foreign countries, America is top dog, okay? I mean, America is highly productive. We might, talk about America being a global importer. They're a very productive nation. They've got a lot of oil themselves. They've got metals. America also is quite self-sufficient. They tend to, what's that phrase? Trump looks after his own. He tries to make America great again, all that horrible MAGA type stuff. But the facts will tell us that America's a key global importer. But their position as a net importer, top dog, is now being challenged because new countries are finding wealth. They're finding richness, okay? And when they find money, they increase their demand for goods and services. And, you may have heard this term before, these BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, but we got the BRICS now because we're going to chuck in South Africa as well. In 2013, these countries combined had 44% of the global population. And because they've seen such huge levels of economic growth, their place on the world economy has changed, and they are now becoming huge importers of goods. China, we know, and we're going to see that in a minute, is a key net exporter. They pump out the stuff that we want, the technology, the manufactured goods, all this stuff. But similarly now, because they're getting more sophisticated, because they're getting more wealthy, they are importing a heck of a lot of stuff too. Okay, sorry, I just said the word stuff, items, assets, whatever you want to say. And let's go to the Chinese then. China's the biggest economy in terms of global exports. We know that. It's ridiculous. Why? Because their costs are so low. And, again, I keep saying we'll look at this again in more detail in the next academic year. And that's true because we're going to start looking in a lot more detail at patterns of trade. But just on a broad level, China has got such low costs in production, textiles, electronics, manufactured goods, etc., etc. There are videos you can watch on YouTube about working for a company called Foxconn. Now, Foxconn is the supplier of the production of iPhones. Okay, so when you see your thing designed in California, manufactured in China, it is Foxconn that are making the iPhones for Apple. Okay, company called Foxconn. But workers are on, I hate to think what they earn, very little. Stress is high. They've got very little in terms of contracts and protection. And because they don't have trade unions and things like that, what can they do about it? They've got a job, get on with it. Okay. But what we can argue now is that because China is seeing huge levels of economic growth, even though it's slowing down a little bit, but huge levels of economic growth, costs are going to start increasing. These workers are going to start saying, well, hang on a minute. We're sitting here making these iPhones. If we don't work, Apple can't get these iPhones. They can't sell them and they can't have their billions of dollars worth of revenue, of money coming in. Okay. So yeah, you might well see workers trying to increase their wages, trying to set up unions, trying to get a bit more safety on contracts. Okay. But if this was to happen, if costs were to go up, it might make it more difficult to maintain the demand for exports, okay, and also to be supplying the exports. What's the solution? Well, if China's getting too big for its boots, so to speak, the economy is getting too big, what could happen? Well, America, Apple might just say to Foxconn, listen, you're too expensive now, we don't need you. And they might go somewhere else, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, and start working with them. And the other thing to say is about I was going to say the term natural monopoly. I don't think you would have ever heard of that. But somewhere like Saudi Arabia, because they're rich in oil, they're almost like naturally the top dog of global exports in oil. And again, you may have heard of these OPEC countries, so Qatar, Saudi, Russia, places like that. America are in there as well, Venezuela, who are naturally rich in oil, and they will control exports and control the market values for oil through no fault of their own, so to speak. I don't know what your views are of the world and design, etc., but how these countries got that oil is not for us to worry about. They have it and they're going to be exploiting it. Okay, I'm not going to try and get into like a philosophical debate there. It's just a fact, I suppose. All right, last thing, I think we need to consider something called protectionism. Okay, now, protectionism is about countries looking after themselves. You would argue that Donald Trump is a highly protectionist president, and his economic view is highly protectionist. Make America great again, MAGA, okay, all that horrible stuff. How does he do it? Jobs for Americans, goods produced in America for Americans, and there we go. And you've got to think about one of the big things in America, the way the geography lies. City called Detroit. I forget which state it's in. It's not a state. That's irrelevant. Detroit is a city in the United States, okay? And historically speaking, it was the central hub of global car production. So General Motors, you might know it, I think is it Vauxhall over here or something, GM's, Ford, they would have the headquarters there. They would have their production in Detroit, okay? And then you look across one of the Great Lakes, I think it's Erie, Huron, I forget which one it is, and you can see across to Canada. And what these car producers worked out was that actually producing in America was too expensive. Okay, so they shifted their production across the Great Lake over to Canada. Obviously, what we saw is that Americans were losing their jobs and Canadians were getting jobs. So what politicians were thinking was, well, we need to find a way to get the jobs back from Canada into America because we've got unemployment issues. So they then started to protect their own economy. Now, I'll tell you how they do that in a minute. What we are seeing, though, is free trade growing. Okay, the European Union started small, now it's absolutely huge, and it's going to keep on getting bigger. Turkey looking to come in, other countries looking to come in, just as we look to leave. But trade in the EU is free. There is no taxes paid when you import and export between countries. Okay, but Britain, because we're a little island and because we're a beer, we are what we are in Britain. You know, we don't really like the EU, so we're leaving. And what we're going to start seeing is we're going to start to protect ourselves against the EU with regards to trade. But whatever we do, the EU is going to do worse to us. How do countries protect? How do they protect their own economies? And by protect, what I mean is that's not useful. Protecting their own economies, protecting their own jobs, protecting their own price levels, protecting their own producers. Number one, you can place a tariff. You can tax imports, okay? So whenever France sends goods over to the UK to sell, we're going to tax their firms to do so, all right? But don't forget, if we tax France, they're going to tax us as well. You might see something called a quota. That's a restriction on the number of imports. Okay, so let's go back to the French again. French wine, for example, is one of their key exports. The British government might say to the French government, we really like your wine, chaps, but we need to think about British wine wine producers as well down in Kent, and that does happen. We do make wine in the UK. So to protect our farmers in the UK, we're only going to let you sell in 1 million bottles of wine each year. Okay, so it's not a tax, it's just a limit on the amount of things that can be sold to us. But don't forget, if we do that to the French, what are they going to do to us? And the last one, government regulations. For example, we don't want to put a tariff or tax. We don't want to set a limit, but we're going to make it harder for countries to sell to us, okay? Increasing safety standards to increase costs. And what you might also say, and Britain does this to the French, and the French do it to us. Say that you're a French producer, you've made loads of goods, you want to export it to the United Kingdom, we want to import it from France. You load it all onto a lorry. That lorry driver drives down to the port, okay? He drives down to Calais. He's going to bring his stuff over to the UK to deliver, and then we're going to be selling it. He meets the British Border Patrol, and they go to him, are you bringing this stuff from France to the UK to sell? He says, oui. He says, yes. Okay, I can speak French, believe it or not. Our border control might say to him on the French side, well, can you fill out these forms? All right. And then what we're going to do, we're going to jump onto your truck. We're just going to safety check everything that you've got. You might be with us for about 7 or 8 hours. Okay. That slows down trade. That annoys the French. Okay. Protects the British economy, but they're going to do far worse to us. All right. Bit of a long story there, but there we go. And the other thing to say is we keep on talking about prices for exports and imports, but other things we can think about as well. Exports will increase if the GDP in other countries goes up. They get richer. They're going to want to buy from us. They're going to want to buy our exports. Changes in taste and fashion. For example, I don't know, the French, I keep speaking with the French, they're known for fashion. They're known to be fashionable people. So because of fashions and tastes and trends, it goes without saying that Brits, Italians, Americans, Spanish people, Japanese people will want to buy products from France if we're into fashion. That means exports for France will go up, imports for us will go up. The productive capacity of a nation, say that China suddenly manages to build another 300 factories with cheap workers. Well, it's natural that they're going to be exporting the goods that they produce. And product differentiation, that's a bit of a business studies term, a bit of a term for next year for the microeconomics. But what about if you was sorry about the noise outside. What about if you as a country develop a product like a phone, for example, with a totally new technology on it? Well, obviously global demand for that is going to be huge, so you're going to be exporting. There we go. Okay, these are our trading partners in 2014. I'm sure things have changed slightly. In terms of exportation, we sell to the Americans, we sell to the Germans, the Dutch, the French, etc. In terms of our importation, we buy a hell of a lot of stuff from the Germans, the Chinese, the Americans. So it's all pretty similar, okay? Listen, 2 things I want you lot to do for me. I'm going to turn this off in a minute because that drill was doing my head in. Number 1, a nice worksheet on imports and exports. Where it says, sorry, let me just check one thing, done. State the terms defined by the following. UK produced output that is sold abroad, pretty much full stop. We haven't done injections. We haven't done circular flow yet. I mentioned it in the first video before I had to move rooms. All you need to do is define UK produced output that is sold abroad. Simple as that. 1.4, the record of all financial transactions between one country and the rest of the world. We have done that. When we looked at data analysis of the Spanish economy back in lesson 1 or 2 or 3 for macro, we did define that. For number 2, will the following increase or decrease the value of UK exports or imports? We're talking about how much we're doing. So, for example, sterling appreciates, sterling goes up in value, that's going to be spiced, imports become cheaper, exports become dearer, so the value of UK exports is going to decrease, the value of UK imports is going to be increasing. How much? And there's a data response bit. Yeah, students got a bit stuck on this last year. This is the pound to the dollar price in 2014 to 15. So where you see that red line, March 2014, £1 gets you $1.65. About, let's say, March 2015, £1 gets you $1.50. Okay, that's all you need to know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave it there because this drill is going to carry on. All this done by 4:30. There's one other worksheet as well which consolidates aggregate demand. This should take you like literally 15 minutes. Okay, it just sums up everything. And then the next time I see you, we move on. All right, have a good afternoon. Be productive, and we're out on email if you need me. Cheers, bye.